From illusory peace to the smoke of gunpowder, humanity's perennial cognitive maze from the illusory dreams of Paris in World War I to the smoke of gunpowder in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. From the power games of great nations to the disputes of small states, humanity has always been trapped in the cognitive illusion of perpetual peace. The cost of shattering such fantasies with artillery fire is unbearably heavy. Only by learning from history, piercing through the fog of cognition, can we safeguard the treasure of peace and prevent the recurrence of historical tragedies. On December 27, 2025, in a United Nations conference room in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, the moment representatives of Thailand and Cambodia put pen to the ceasefire agreement, the ink blotted on the paper much like the smoke of gunpowder that had spread across the border battlefields half a year earlier. Few would link the end of this conflict to the casual tavern conversations in a Paris summer night in 1914, or the compromising signing in Munich in 1938. But when we brush aside the mists of time, we find that from the two great catastrophes on the European continent to local standoffs in the Asia-Pacific, humanity seems to be repeating the same cognitive predicament. As the shadow of war looms, we collectively succumb to the illusion of perpetual peace, only to wake up with a jolt when artillery fire shatters that fantasy. This is no accidental historical coincidence, but a profound proposition woven into the fabric of human development, waiting to be unraveled layer by layer. In Europe in 1914, the illusion of peace had seeped into every corner of society. Beyond the toasts and laughter along the Seine, machines roared day and night in Berlin's factories. Krupp's arms factory saw its steel output soar year after year. Yet most interpreted this as a symbol of industrial prosperity, not the warm-up of a war machine. Inside the London, mainstream European media at the time preferred to highlight the kinship ties between royal families. Britain's The Times once published a photo of the kings of Britain, Germany, and Russia in a report, with the bold headline "Blood-related Guardians of Europe," conveying the optimistic belief that kinship can stop the flames of war between the lines. This perception was not groundless, but rooted in nearly 50 years of peace inertia. Since the end of the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, no large-scale cross-border wars had broken out on the European continent, with local conflicts mostly concentrated in the Balkans and overseas colonies. For people in core cities like Paris and London, disputes in the Balkans were fights between barbarians, and conflicts in colonies were the expansion of civilization, both irrelevant to their peaceful lives. Europeans at the time generally believed that industrial progress and trade prosperity would make war unprofitable, and rational capitalists would never abandon huge commercial interests for territorial disputes. This argument of economy determining peace became the mainstream consensus of society, blinding people to potential war risks. More notably, the military theoretical community at the time also contributed to this illusion of peace. Many military experts claimed that the emergence of new weapons would make war short and decisive, with no prolonged stalemate. The core of the Schlieffen Plan formulated by the German General Staff was to defeat France in 6 weeks and then turn to face Russia, a plan the public interpreted as a guarantee against a long war. Ordinary people's understanding of military technology was limited to advanced weapons equals quick victory. Yet they ignored that the upgrade of weapons would also multiply their lethality. In July 1914, when news of Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia arrived, crowds even cheered on the streets of Berlin. Young men rushed to enlist, viewing it as the perfect opportunity to show patriotism. In their luggage, they packed bread and wine for picnics, convinced they would return triumphant in a few weeks. However, the cruelty of war soon exceeded everyone's imagination. In August 1914, German troops invaded France but met stubborn resistance from French forces at the Marne, and the Schlieffen Plan collapsed completely, plunging the war into a stalemate. The Western Front quickly descended into trench warfare, where soldiers on both sides huddled in muddy trenches, facing intense artillery fire, lethal poison gas, and pervasive injuries and illnesses every day. Artillery shells rained down on the positions, plowing the land over and over again. Soldiers' blood soaked the mud, turning the trenches into death traps. according to a World War I battlefield diary. A British soldier wrote in 1915, "Our daily work is to bury the bodies of our comrades, clear the water and sludge from the trenches. We have no idea where the next shell will land, or when this nightmare will end. All the fantasies before the war have turned to dust in the artillery fire." What was predicted to be a short war ultimately lasted 4 years and 3 months, becoming one of the bloodiest wars in human history. Authoritative historical records show that in addition to the death toll in each country, the number of wounded and disabled soldiers was staggering, 4.2 million. In Germany, 3 million in France, 2.12 million in Britain, and 2.7 million in Russia. Behind these numbers lay countless broken families and the decline of the entire Europe. After the war, Europe's industrial output dropped by 40%. Agricultural production ground to a halt, and the heavy casualties of young laborers led to a severe labor shortage. Once prosperous cities like Paris and Berlin were scarred by war everywhere. Among the ruins, the pre-war peace was nowhere to be found. It was only then that Europeans truly realized that their pre-war perception of peace was nothing but a self-deceiving illusion, and the cost of this illusion was the lives of tens of millions and Europe's golden age. More than 2 decades later, the fog of history once again shrouded Europe. Before the bitter memories of World War I had fully faded, politicians of the victorious powers made a fatal mistake. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed harsh reparations on Germany, requiring it to pay 132 billion gold marks in war damages, while ceding 13% of its territory and 10% of its population. The signing of this treaty fueled growing discontent among the German people and provided fertile ground for the rise of extreme nationalism. Marshal Foch of France had long seen the hidden dangers of the treaty. After reviewing it, he bluntly stated, "This is not a peace treaty, but a 20-year truce." Yet this warning fell on deaf ears among the politicians of the victorious powers, who were immersed in the joy of victory and believed that the harsh treaty would solve the German problem once and for all. In 1923, France, in alliance with Belgium, sent troops to occupy Germany's Ruhr industrial zone on the grounds that Germany had failed to pay reparations on time. This move was like a match that ignited German nationalist sentiment. The German people in the Ruhr launched a large-scale passive resistance movement, with factories shutting down and shops closing, pushing Germany's economy to the brink of collapse. To support the resistance, the German government printed a flood of banknotes, triggering hyperinflation. In November 1923, $1 could be tube baking and scavenging for a living. This extreme economic distress deepened the German people's hatred for the victorious powers and created the perfect social conditions for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. After coming to power, Hitler began to gradually implement expansionist policies, while Britain, France, and other countries adopted a policy of appeasement. In 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier, Hitler, and Benito Mussolini met in Munich and signed the Munich Agreement, ceding the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia to Germany. Upon returning to Britain, Chamberlain declared to the public, "I have brought peace for our time." And the French people generally believed that compromise would bring tranquility. Most mainstream European media at the time supported the appeasement policy, viewing sacrificing the interests of small nations for the peace of great powers as a wise move. Yet no one realized that compromise would only embolden the aggressor, and the shadow of war was creeping closer step by step. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and World War II broke out in full force, shattering Chamberlain's peace illusion completely. Only then did Europe wake up to the fact that the appeasement policy had not brought peace, but instead emboldened Nazi Germany, plunging Europe into an even greater catastrophe. During World War II, the European continent was once again ravaged by war. Germany's blitzkrieg led to the rapid fall of many countries, and a large number of civilians died in the war and massacres. According to authoritative statistics, more than 60 million people died worldwide during World War II, including 26 million in Europe and 27 million in the Soviet Union, including military personnel and civilians. Once prosperous European cities were reduced to ruins again, people were displaced, and peace became a luxury once more. At that time, most people, including Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, failed to see the danger of the situation. In the 1930s, Stalin oversaw a purge within the Red Army, executing a large number of outstanding military generals, including 3 of the 5 marshals, 13 of the 15 Army Group commanders, and 57 of the 85 Corps commanders. This purge severely weakened the combat effectiveness of the Red Army, leading to a series of defeats for the Soviet Union in the early stages of World War II in the face of the German invasion. Historical records show that after Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, the Red Army suffered heavy losses in the first few months, with more than 1 million casualties and a large swath of territory occupied by German troops. If Stalin had foreseen the shadow of war and recognized Nazi Germany's aggressive ambitions, he would never have made the choice to weaken his own combat effectiveness. This historical fact once again proves that even the top leadership can fall into a cognitive maze and make wrong judgments on the eve of war. Humanity is like standing on a spinning wheel of history, always thinking it can avoid the potholes of the past, yet stumbling in similar places time and again. Time moved on to early 2022. The cheers of the Beijing Winter Olympics had not yet faded, and the smoke of gunpowder on the Russia-Ukraine border had already risen quietly. From February 4th to 20th, the world's attention was focused on the competitions on the field, and the brilliant performances of athletes dominated the front pages of major media. No one expected that just 4 days later, on February 24th, Russia's military operation would officially begin. At the time, international public opinion generally believed that Russia's military operation was just a local skirmish that would end soon, and many analysts even predicted that Russia would take control of Ukraine's core areas in a few weeks. In reality, however, numerous clear war signals had emerged before the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Since the 2014 Crimea incident, armed standoffs in eastern Ukraine had continued unabated, and exchanges of fire between separatist forces in the Donbas region and the Ukrainian government army had never truly ceased. According to United Nations statistics, the conflict in eastern Ukraine from 2014 to 2021 caused more than 14,000 deaths and displaced a large number of civilians. Meanwhile, NATO's eastward expansion kept approaching Russia's strategic red lines, admitting 14 Central and Eastern European countries one after another and pushing its military frontiers to Russia's doorstep. In December 2021, Russia put forward security guarantee initiatives to the United States and NATO, demanding that NATO stop its eastward expansion and not deploy offensive weapons in Ukraine, but this reasonable request was rejected by the United States and NATO. The Zelensky government also repeatedly claimed to abrogate the Minsk agreements and strengthen military cooperation with NATO. These signals all indicated that the situation on the Russia-Ukraine border was deteriorating steadily. Yet these clear war signals were overshadowed by the collective perception that Russia would continue to back down. At the time, European countries generally believed that Russia's economic strength was insufficient to sustain a long war, and under the pressure of Western sanctions, Russia would eventually choose to compromise. European companies continued energy cooperation with Russia, although Germany's Nord Stream to natural gas pipeline project was suspended for a time. Due to tense relations, many European countries still hope to resolve the issue through diplomatic negotiations. The United States and NATO kept providing military aid to Ukraine, attempting to exhaust Russia's strength through a proxy war, yet ignored the risk of war escalation. What was predicted to be a local skirmish has lasted for 4 years. According to Agence France-Presse's inventory, 3 years after the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, several key turning points emerged, plunging the war into a prolonged stalemate. In April 2022, the Bacha incident in the suburbs of Kyiv caused an international outcry, with both sides accusing each other of war crimes, greatly reducing the possibility of diplomatic negotiations. In the same month of May, Russian troops captured Mariupol, a major city in southeastern Ukraine, and fierce positional battles were fought at the Azovstal iron and steel works, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. At the end of August 2022, Ukraine launched counteroffensives in the Kherson region in the south and the Kharkiv region in the northeast, recapturing a large amount of territory and breaking Russia's offensive momentum. In May 2023, Russian troops seized Bakhmut, a key town in eastern Ukraine. This months-long battle was dubbed one of the bloodiest battles since World War II, with more than 100,000 casualties on both sides. In June 2023, the mutiny of the Wagner Group further complicated the situation. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, led his men towards Moscow, and Vladimir Putin accused him of mutiny, but Prigozhin later ordered his men to return to their camps. 2 months later, Prigozhin died in a mysterious plane crash. This incident not only affected Russia's internal stability but also had a profound impact on the situation on the Russia-Ukraine battlefield. In June 2024, the Group of 7 G7 reached an agreement at a meeting in Italy to use frozen Russian assets to assist Kyiv, launching a $50 billion aid loan to Ukraine. Meanwhile, at a peace summit held in Switzerland, countries reaffirmed the principles of Ukraine's independence and territorial sovereignty. These measures further increased Western support for Ukraine. By the end of 2025, the Russia-Ukraine conflict had caused heavy casualties and property losses on both sides. According to the latest United Nations statistics, the conflict has resulted in more than 300,000 deaths, including about 200,000 military personnel and 100,000 civilians. And more than 14 million people have been displaced, over 6 million internally displaced in Ukraine and more than 8 million fleeing abroad. Ukraine's infrastructure has been severely damaged. Its industrial output has dropped by more than 50%. And agricultural production has also been seriously affected, with a large amount of farmland left uncultivated due to the war. Russia has been subject to comprehensive Western sanctions, severely restricting its economic development, but still sustains the war with its strong energy exports and military industry. Although the two sides have not reached a comprehensive peace agreement in the second half of 2025, through multiple rounds of negotiations, a local ceasefire was achieved in some areas of eastern Ukraine, bringing a glimmer of hope to the situation. During the conflict, it is true that senior Russian military generals have been killed or injured, but rumors about the assassination of a Russian lieutenant general on the streets of Moscow have always lacked authoritative evidence and are unfounded. In February 2025, after Donald Trump returned to the White House, he took new measures on the Ukraine issue. After a phone call with Putin, he announced that he would hold direct negotiations with Putin and claimed that Ukraine's accession to NATO was unrealistic, and it was also unlikely to restore the border to the status quo before Russia's annexation of Crimea. On February 16th, Trump claimed that he would meet with Putin in Saudi Arabia soon, and the latter also hoped for the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. These U.S. measures have raised concerns among Europeans that they may be excluded from this major process that concerns their own interests. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged European allies to be vigilant against the possibility of the United States signing agreements behind Kyiv and Europe's back. The future of the Russia-Ukraine conflict remains full of uncertainty. But this conflict once again proves that pre-war optimistic predictions are often shattered by harsh reality, and the cost of the collective cognitive maze is the loss of countless lives and the destruction of homes. The same cognitive maze is not limited to the games of great powers, but also lurks in the disputes of small nations. On February 14, 2019, a terrorist attack occurred in the town of Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir, killing more than 40 personnel of India's Central Reserve Police Force. This incident ignited tensions on the India-Pakistan border. The revenge sentiment among the Indian people ran high, and the government responded quickly by launching airstrikes on targets inside Pakistan. At the time, most global analysts believed that Pakistan would choose to exercise restraint and avoid direct military conflict with India, because Pakistan's economic and military strength were weaker than India's, and once the conflict escalated, Pakistan would be at a disadvantage. But the development of the situation exceeded everyone's expectations. On February 27, 2019, the India-Pakistan air combat officially broke out. The Pakistan Air Force dispatched fighter jets and shot down 2 Indian fighter jets, one of which, AMIG-21, crashed in Pakistani territory, and the pilot was captured by Pakistan. The Pakistan Air Force, however, suffered no losses and won the air combat. This result invalidated all previous predictions and made the international community rethink the military balance between India and Pakistan. Pakistan's victory not only dealt a blow to India's arrogance but also enhanced its influence in the international community. Subsequently, under the mediation of the international community, both India and Pakistan exercised restraint, released the captured Indian pilot, and the situation gradually eased. But this conflict also made people realize that the cognitive maze exists in the disputes of small nations as well. Underestimating the opponent's resolve and capabilities too much can often lead to the loss of control of the situation. The 2025 Thai-Cambodian border conflict vividly demonstrated this cognitive maze to the fullest. This border dispute, which began on May 28th, initially was just a brief exchange of fire between the two armies, and all parties thought it was just a routine border skirmish that would subside soon. But no one expected that within less than 2 months, the situation would escalate. Sharply, on July 23rd, a Thai soldier stepped on a landmine on the Thai-Cambodian border and lost a leg. Thailand believed that the landmine had been newly laid by Cambodia, and immediately recalled its ambassador to Cambodia and expelled the Cambodian ambassador. In response, the Cambodian government downgraded diplomatic relations with Thailand to the charge d'affaires level, recalled all diplomats and staff from its embassy in Thailand except for essential personnel, and ordered Thai diplomats to leave the country within a time limit. On the morning of July 24th, fierce exchanges of fire broke out between Thailand and Cambodia in the border area. Citing Thai military sources, Agence France Presse reported that Cambodia fired 2 BM-21 rocket launchers at a community in Thailand's Surin province, injuring several people. The Thai military immediately dispatched F-16 fighter jets and destroyed the Cambodian military facilities. A statement from the Thai Prime Minister's office showed that a Cambodian artillery shell hit a residential house, killing 1 person, seriously injuring a 5-year-old child, and injuring 2 others. According to CNN reports, Thailand's health department stated that the border conflict had killed 11 Thai civilians and 1 military personnel. Earlier, citing Thai military sources, Britain's The Guardian reported that the conflict had killed 9 Thai civilians and injured 14 others. After the outbreak of the conflict, the militaries of the 2 countries accused each other of firing the first shot. A spokesperson for the Cambodian Ministry of National Defense said that Thai troops first launched an armed attack on Cambodian troops, and the Cambodian military was exercising its right to self-defense. The Thai army stated in a report that Cambodian troops opened fire on Thai troops in the Ta Muan Tham temple area on the Thai-Cambodian border at 8:20 a.m., and Thai troops immediately counterattacked. Cambodian Prime Minister Han Manet urged the public to remain calm, trust the government and the armed forces, and stated that Cambodia has always adhered to the position of resolving issues peacefully. But in this situation, it had no choice but to respond to armed aggression with the armed forces. Han Manet also sent a letter to the July rotating president of the UN Security Council, requesting the council to hold an emergency meeting to intervene and stop Thailand's aggression. Thailand, for its part, took a series of tough measures, closing border checkpoints with Cambodia. The Ministry of Education ordering the temporary suspension of 582 schools in the conflict-affected areas along the Thai-Cambodian border, and urging schools in the border area to formulate response plans and prepare shelters or safe areas for students. The Thai embassy in Cambodia also urged Thai citizens in Cambodia to leave the country as soon as possible, warning that the conflict may last for a long time and expand further, and advising people not to travel to Cambodia unless necessary. For a time, the situation on the Thai-Cambodian border was extremely tense, and the shadow of war loomed over the 2 countries. Just as everyone thought the conflict would escalate further, a turning point emerged. With the joint mediation of China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN, Thailand and Cambodia signed a ceasefire agreement on December 27, 2025, achieving a ceasefire. According to the agreement, the two sides will withdraw some military forces from the border area, establish a demilitarized buffer zone, and set up a joint working group to negotiate and resolve border disputes. This result brought a sigh of relief to people, and the dawn of a ceasefire finally pierced through the fog. This conflict once again proved that both great and small nations can fall into a cognitive maze on the eve of a dispute, overestimating their own strength and underestimating the opponent's resolve, thus leading to the escalation of the situation. Moreover, the mediation and arbitration by third parties play a crucial role in resolving conflicts and promoting peaceful solutions. These conflict cases spanning time and space are like mirrors, reflecting the fatal shortcoming of human cognition. Our lives are like fleeting candle flames, only able to illuminate a few decades of time. Yet we have to judge historical laws that stretch for thousands of years. Deviations are inevitable. People who grow up in peaceful times always take tranquility as eternity. Those who have experienced wars cherish peace especially. This generational divide thickens the fog of cognition even more. More importantly, human rationality is often swayed by emotions and interests. In a peaceful environment, it is easy to breed complacency and ignore potential risks. Driven by interests, we may make short-sighted decisions that push the situation to the brink of danger. From a sociological perspective, the formation of the collective cognitive maze has complex causes. First, information asymmetry and filtering are important factors. On the eve of war, governments and media often release information selectively, exaggerating the atmosphere of peace and covering up the risks of war to stabilize social order or achieve their own political goals. Before World War I, the media of various European countries publicized their own military strength and peaceful intentions, avoiding mention of potential war risks. Before the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Western media generally underestimated Russia's resolve and overemphasized its economic difficulties, leading the public to form the illusion that Russia will not easily resort to force. Second, the influence of group psychology cannot be ignored. In a group, an individual's ability to think rationally is weakened, and they are easily infected by group emotions, forming a herd mentality. Before World War I, the people of various European countries were swept up in patriotic sentiment and supported the government's decision to go to war. Before World War II, the appeasement policy was widely supported by the European people, because everyone yearned for peace and feared experiencing the suffering of war again. This group mentality deprives people of the ability to judge independently, making them blindly follow the mainstream cognition and thus falling into the cognitive maze. In addition, the misinterpretation of historical experience can also lead to cognitive biases. People often judge the current situation based on past experience. But history, while similar, never repeats itself exactly. Before World War I, Europeans believed that war would not break out again based on nearly 50 years of peaceful experience. Before the Russia-Ukraine conflict, many people believed that direct military conflict between great powers would not occur based on the experience of the Cold War. But facts have proved that historical experience cannot be fully applied to the current situation, and over-reliance on historical experience will only lead to cognitive biases. Today, beneath the peaceful landscape of Northeast Asia, there lurks an undercurrent of extreme pressure from external forces. In 2025, the situation in the Asia-Pacific region is fraught with changes and turmoil, with increasing instability and uncertainties. The Western Bloc led by the United States has taken realistic military exercises and training as the main means to test operational concepts and conduct military pressure, with their frequency and scale reaching a new high. Multinational joint military exercises held in the same period, such as RIMPAC 2025, Talisman Sabre 2025, and Pacific Synergy 2025, set record scales and systematically incorporated subjects such as cyber warfare, space warfare, and electromagnetic spectrum conference. In February 2025, during the Japanese Prime Minister's visit to the United States, the two sides confirmed the strengthening of multi-level security cooperation with so-called like-minded countries. At the same time, multilateral security dialogue mechanisms such as the US-Japan ROC, US-Japan-Philippines, and US-Japan-Australia-India have been continuously strengthened and linked with the second pillar of the AUKUS trilateral security partnership, weaving a three-dimensional and multi-layered military cooperation network covering the Asia-Pacific. These measures have seriously undermined the strategic balance in the Asia-Pacific region and exacerbated regional tensions. Strategic stability in Northeast Asia has been severely impacted. The layout of the U.S. Trump administration in the economic, military, and technological fields has brought a structural impact to the geopolitical pattern of Northeast Asia, leading to a deepening of the security dilemma in the region. Against this background, Japan has shown a series of dangerous moves in its security strategy and regional policies. In November, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi made erroneous remarks on Taiwan in the Diet, deliberately distorting facts. Recently, she has openly discussed the possibility of possessing nuclear weapons and sought the capability to strike enemy bases. These moves not only seriously violate the basic norms of international relations but also pose a direct threat to regional peace and stability, leading to rising tensions. Holding the fantasy that China will abandon its struggle for the sake of the economy. These external forces have repeatedly touched the bottom line through the salami-slicing tactic much like the European politicians before World War I, the appeasers before World War II, and the optimists before the Russia-Ukraine conflict, overestimating their ability to control the situation. They believe that China will tolerate the provocation and pressure from external forces to maintain economic development and will not take tough countermeasures. But they ignore China's resolve to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and also underestimate China's strength and response capabilities. In fact, China has always adhered to the path of peaceful development, eager to establish friendly and cooperative relations with all countries in the world and jointly safeguard world peace and development. But China will never abandon its core interests for the sake of peace, and will never tolerate any country infringing on China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. History has proven and will continue to prove that any attempt to challenge China's core interests will be firmly countered, and any cognition that underestimates China's resolve and capabilities will pay a heavy price. The situation in South Asia also deserves close attention. In April 2025, a terrorist attack occurred in the town of Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir, triggering an escalation of confrontation between India and Pakistan, and the situation was once tense. Analysts believe that this crisis has exacerbated strategic mutual distrust between the two sides, changed their security interaction model, and posed challenges to South Asian security governance. At the same time, its spillover effects have cast a shadow over the security environment of the Asia-Pacific region. The risk of standoffs in Southeast Asia still exists. An annual survey by overseas academic institutions shows that regional countries' attention to relevant sea areas has risen sharply. Infringement and provocative acts by countries such as the Philippines in relevant sea areas have significantly increased the risk of maritime accidents and their escalation into conflicts. ASEAN countries have tried to maintain stability through internal coordination and multifaceted dialogue. But under the background of the deep intervention of external forces such as the United States, their balanced diplomacy is facing enormous pressure. Looking at the world, the current international situation is complex and volatile, with increasing instability and uncertainties, and the risk of war still exists. But peace and development remain the themes of the times, and people of all countries yearn for peace and oppose war. How to break the collective cognitive maze and prevent the recurrence of historical tragedies is an important issue facing all humanity. First, we must respect historical facts, draw lessons from history, and deeply recognize the cruelty of war and the preciousness of peace. Second, we must strengthen the openness and transparency of information to avoid cognitive biases caused by information asymmetry and filtering. Third, we must cultivate the ability to think independently, overcome the influence of group psychology, and judge the development of the situation rationally. Finally, we must strengthen international cooperation, resolve disputes through dialogue and negotiation, and jointly safeguard world peace and stability. Zhu Mu, a great poet of the Tang Dynasty, once said, It was the Six Kingdoms themselves that destroyed the Six Kingdoms, not Qin. It was Qin itself that doomed Qin, not the world. The people of Qin had no time to mourn for themselves, but later generations mourned for them. If later generations mourn for them yet fail to learn from their lessons, they will in turn make the generations after them mourn for them. The laws of history are like the cycle of the four seasons, never changing. Peace is never an eternal gift, but a treasure that needs to be guarded with rationality. In the next 2 years, the situation in Northeast Asia will remain full of unknowns, and the security challenges in the Asia-Pacific region will still be severe. But only by seeing through the fog of history, drawing lessons from history, adhering to the path of peaceful development, and strengthening international cooperation and communication, can we avoid repeating tragedies and let the sunshine of peace illuminate every corner of the world. This is perhaps the greatest significance of looking back at the stories on the eve of those wars, and also the responsibility and mission of our generation. This fog of peace, like water-soaked cotton wool, muffled everyone's ears and eyes. At that time, the European royal families were bound by blood. The British king and the Russian Tsar were cousins, and the German Kaiser was also related to the British king by marriage. People were convinced that the bonds of kinship could resolve all disputes. Nobles and capitalists were busy plundering colonial wealth in alliance. Britain supplied raw materials, Germany manufactured industrial products, and France lent money at usurious rates. The entire Europe operated like a precise machine, and no one thought it would suddenly spin out of control until a single gunshot in Sarajevo pierced this false calm like an awl. On June 28, 1914, news of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by the young patriot Gavrilo Princip initially was only regarded as an exotic murder case. People of all countries even supported the war with blind excitement, firmly believing that the war would be like a short outing, and they would return triumphant in a few months. But reality is a sharp knife, and it soon cut through the fantasies. Half a year later, the Western Front descended into brutal trench warfare. Artillery shells rained down on the positions, and soldiers' blood soaked the mud. What was predicted to be a short war eventually turned into a beast devouring lives. 2.3 million deaths in Germany, 1.1 million. In Austria-Hungary, 1.4 million in France, 715,000 in Britain, 580,000 in Italy, and at least 2 million in Russia, with the subsequent civil war adding to the toll. When the war ended, Europeans finally woke up to the fact that their pre-war perception of peace was nothing but a self-deceiving illusion. More than 2 decades later, the fog of history once again shrouded Europe. Before the bitter memories of World War I had fully faded, politicians of the victorious powers fell into a new delusion. They believed that Germany had been completely subjugated and formulated a harsh reparations treaty, yet failed to heed Marshal Foch's warning that the Treaty of Versailles was not a peace treaty, but a 20-year truce. In 1923, France, in alliance with Belgium, sent troops to occupy Germany's Ruhr industrial zone, a move like a match that ignited German nationalist sentiment and paved the way for Hitler's rise. Faced with Nazi Germany's expansion, Neville Chamberlain and others, but just 1 year later, the artillery fire of World War II swept across the European continent. At that time, most people, including Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, failed to see the danger of the situation. The purge he oversaw in the Red Army before the war, in which a large number of outstanding generals were executed, indirectly weakened the army's combat effectiveness. If he had foreseen the shadow of war earlier, he would never have made such a choice. Humanity is like standing on a spinning wheel of history, always thinking it can avoid the potholes of the past, yet stumbling in similar places time and again. Tang moved on to early 2022. The cheers of the Beijing Winter Olympics had not yet faded, and the smoke of gunpowder on the Russia-Ukraine border had already risen quietly. From February 4th to 20th, the world's attention was focused on the competitions on the field, and no one expected that just 4 days later, on February 24th, Russia's military operation would officially begin. Prior to this, armed standoffs in eastern Ukraine had continued for years. NATO's eastward expansion kept approaching Russia's strategic red lines, and the Zelensky government claimed to abrogate the Minsk agreements. These clear war signals were overshadowed by the collective perception that Russia would continue to back down. What was predicted to be a local skirmish has lasted for 4 years. By the end of 2025, although the two sides have not reached a comprehensive peace agreement, the emergence of a local ceasefire has brought a glimmer of hope to the situation. During the conflict, it is true that senior Russian military generals have been killed or injured, but rumors about the assassination of a Russian lieutenant general on the streets of Moscow have always lacked authoritative evidence. Just like countless conflicts in history, pre-war optimistic predictions were ultimately shattered by harsh reality. The same cognitive maze is not limited to the games of great powers, but also lurks in the disputes of small nations. On February 14, 2019, a terrorist attack in Indian-administered Kashmir ignited tensions on the India-Pakistan border. At the time, most analysts believed that Pakistan would choose to exercise restraint, yet no one expected the sudden outbreak of air combat on February 27. The Pakistan Air Force shot down 2 Indian fighter jets with no losses of its own, a result that invalidated all previous predictions. The 2025 Thai-Cambodian border conflict was similar. All parties thought it was a routine skirmish before the war, but it eventually escalated into the most intense confrontation in the ASEAN region in recent years. Fortunately, this time, with the mediation of China and ASEAN, the two sides signed a ceasefire agreement on December 27, and the dawn of a ceasefire finally pierced through the fog. These stories are like mirrors, reflecting the fatal shortcoming of human cognition. Our lives are like fleeting candle flames, only able to illuminate a few decades of time. Yet we have to judge historical laws that stretch for thousands of years. Deviations are inevitable. People who grow up in peaceful times always take tranquility as eternity. Those who have experienced wars cherish peace especially. This generational divide thickens the fog of cognition even more. Today, beneath the peaceful landscape of Northeast Asia, there lurks an undercurrent of extreme pressure from external forces, holding the fantasy that China will abandon its struggle for the sake of the economy. They have repeatedly touched the bottom line through the salami-slicing tactic. Much like the European politicians before World War I, the appeasers before World War II, and the optimists before the Russia-Ukraine conflict, overestimating their ability to control the situation. Zhu Mu once said, "It was the Six Kingdoms themselves that destroyed the Six Kingdoms, not Qin. It was Qin itself that doomed Qin, not the world." The people of Qin had no time to mourn for themselves, but later generations mourned for them. If later generations mourn for them yet fail to learn from their lessons, the laws of history are like the cycle of the 4 seasons, never changing. Peace is never an eternal gift, but a treasure that needs to be guarded with rationality. In the next 2 years, the situation in Northeast Asia will remain full of unknowns. But only by seeing through the fog of history can we avoid repeating tragedies. And this is perhaps the greatest significance of looking back at the stories on the eve of those wars.